What's going on down in Florida? Congressman, good to see you. What are you hearing about the damage, about the response? You're a Florida guy. How's it going?
Yeah, down in my area, it's obviously not as bad as it was during Ian. We're still getting reports on the catastrophic damage in the part where the storm came through, but thankfully not as bad as Ian from the early reports. The storm surge wasn't as big as it was. And I will say this is the blessing with this storm that wasn't with Ian or Irma that we've seen historically, is all of the forecasts were exactly accurate in where the storm was going to go. So people had almost a week to prepare, unlike Ian, where it was originally supposed to go into the Panhandle, then made a turn like Gainesville, then it was going to go into Tampa, then it was going to hit Sarasota and ended up going right through Charlotte Harbor. So that's been the blessing, is Floridians have had plenty of time to be able to get themselves evacuated from areas that are going to be affected by the storm surge and deal with the things that they need to deal with to serve their families and their businesses.
Congressman, before we move on, some of the counties that were hardest hit, say Dixie, Taylor County, Levy County, I hope I said that right, that Levy, a lot of these counties are not that wealthy, not as wealthy as other parts of Florida, and might need more funding either from the state level or even the federal level, correct?
Well, here's the whole politics of disaster supplementals. My district in Southwest Florida still hasn't gotten disaster supplemental from almost a year ago now. I've been working on a bill to give some tax relief to the citizens that were affected by Hurricane Ian. We still haven't passed that because the Biden administration wants to tack on funding for Ukraine on disaster supplementals. He's been very outspoken about adding Ukraine funding to disaster supplementals. So that's what's held all of this up. And I would ask the administration, I would ask Chuck Schumer in the Senate to stop using disaster supplementals as a political pawn for your objectives to give more money to Ukraine when Americans desperately need the resources to get themselves back.
Give them a clean bill. It's really simple, but again, they
Absolutely.
want the Biden priorities of Ukraine ahead of the American people. It's outrageous. But you're mentioning how the federal government has responded. We've had double disasters, one in Maui, now this one in Florida. And they're putting pressure on FEMA, and its multiple disasters have bled the coffers dry. So Florida Senator Rick Scott is blaming misplaced priorities and is planning to vote to replenish the fund. But President Biden says he's pointing fingers at the lawmakers in Congress like yourself. Watch this.
Can you assure Americans that the federal government is going to have the emergency funding that they need to get through this hurricane season?
The answer is, if I can't do that, I'm going to point out why. How can we not respond? My God, how can we not respond to these needs? And so I'm confident, even though there's a lot of talk from some of our friends up on the Hill about the cost, we got to do it. This is the United States of America.
So to your point, Congressman, he wants to point the finger at members of Congress who will more than likely pass this legislation to refund FEMA. Dagan and I have some issues with how that money is spent. But really, it's Biden who's trying to fund Ukraine through American disasters. It's his fault.
Yeah, well, let's do it. Let's help Americans first and not Ukraine first. We've given like $120 billion to Ukraine, and we haven't even done a disaster supplemental for people that were affected by Hurricane Ian last year in my district. And just recently, Biden has said if we pass this disaster supplemental, they want Ukraine funding added onto that. And I absolutely will not support that. Even if there's disaster supplemental funding, if there's Ukraine funding that's lopped into that, that should have no place, no business whatsoever. I have no problem with helping the people in California wildfires, helping the people in Maui that were affected by the wildfires, helping people that have been affected by the train derailment, the hurricanes. Put it all together, but it should be a disaster supplemental and not put with all this garbage that Democrats love to pony on to those type of bills.
Indeed. Before we go, in August, the Biden administration submitted a request for $40 billion in new emergency funding, $12 billion for FEMA, and he's going to stand there and try and shame you. He didn't name you and fellow Republicans on Capitol Hill, but there was $24 billion in aid to Ukraine. So he's going to try and lay this at your feet and act like you're insensitive.
Yeah, that's exactly how this administration operates. If you're going to vote against that because it has Ukraine funding in it, oh, I don't want to support my own district that has been catastrophically affected by Hurricane Ian, Floridians that have now been affected by Ian and now this storm, and they'll just because they want to attach all this other funding to it. This is how the Washington swamp works. This is how Democrats and the administration has worked the entire time that I've been in Congress. They use these type of issues that make it very hard to vote against things that they want to get in the funding supplementals, and it's absolutely not America First policy. It's not the American way. We should stand for America first.
Good of you for standing up and pointing it out and saying, I'm not going to vote for the money if I got to spend money in Ukraine. Greg Steube, thanks for joining us on The Bottom Line. We appreciate it. Good luck down there.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Congressman. Slow